I was on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. I had the nice apartment. I had a beautiful woman in my life. I had raised about $10 million for my company. I was ticking the boxes. I was killing it. And yet, dude, I just was like not happy. Oh, so you think something outside of yourself is going to make you feel better. You know, you think that the problem is that you don't have something in the outside world that you want. What she had me do was...
All right, welcome back to Holgren Wisdom Podcast, where we are merging ancient wisdom and science for finally understanding they're saying the same thing, just in different languages. Today we're with Scott. How's it going?
Great. It's wonderful to be here.
Let me make a quick intro, and I'll introduce the very first question. I love and I wanted you on this podcast because I love your story on the spiritual journey that kind of came out from your entrepreneurship path and professional life. You're indeed a founder and a community builder. You sold your last company to Salesforce, and you're now leading Conscious Talent, which is a platform with a mission to reconnect the dots between the personal evolution and the professional goals. And you're also the author of the book Conscious Accomplishment, where I guess you're telling all of this story and reconnecting the dots and your own inner journey and the paradigm to integrate spiritual development, external achievement. I love all of this because this is exactly somehow the nut, like the core of Holgren wisdom. We are merging these two worlds, and we're also trying to reconnect the dots between the external world and the internal world. So I'm curious, guide us a little bit. What have been the first steps and what brought you to where you are today? What has been your journey?
You know, I think a lot of us who end up on a spiritual path do so out of suffering, right? It's like if everything is going great in your life, odds are, at least if you're following the cultural indoctrination and narratives, you're not going to seek out spirituality or consciousness. You're probably focused on killing it and, you know, living the big life and having the nice things and all the exotic travel and all that kind of stuff. Like that's kind of what's in vogue. And for me, there's really kind of multiple inflection points of my consciousness journey. The first was when I was 24, I started losing my hair from alopecia. And it was because I was so stressed, because I was so, you know, trying to like take over the world. And that got me meditating. And so I became a meditator and would go on and off again. And in the first couple of months of starting my last company, this was about 8 years ago, or maybe even 9 years ago, I'm not sure, 2015, I had a panic attack. And after that, I was like, okay, like meditation is like, it's a non-negotiable. This is like brushing my teeth. You know, I'm going to do this every day, no matter what. So I was meditating, very secular thing, very like, all right, I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes and I know I'll be good. There was no, wow, enlightenment. What is that? Or I want to know myself more, right? It was more just like, I want to keep my hair. And I don't want to be super stressed. Yeah, about 6 years into the meditation journey is when I had my first plant medicine experience. Now, I came to plant medicine because I was, by all means, like living the dream, right? I had raised about $10 million for my company. I was on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. I had the nice apartment. I had a beautiful woman in my life. Like I kind of had this, like I was living in New York City. Like I was ticking the boxes. I was killing it. You know, I was all the things, right? And yet, dude, I just was like not happy. You know, I just was so intense. And I finally started to see that. You know, I finally started to like feel like this isn't fun. And I've lost a lot of my joy. And a buddy of mine, I didn't really know what to do. I'd been meditator, right? So like, that's one thing people say, go meditate. It's like, cool. I was already doing that. I'd tried therapy. That kind of didn't really make a big change. And so a friend invited me to an ayahuasca journey. And I was like, all right, what do I have to lose? Like, let's give this a shot. And that was my first true altered state of consciousness. You know, that was really the first time I experienced a larger reality and kind of touched my essential nature. And after that, you know, I was just like, this is a way more interesting thing to explore than how to grow your startup fast. You know, this is way more interesting than 6-pack abs. This is way more interesting than all these other things that had consumed me for the past decade. Basically, pretty quickly, like started to just pursue consciousness very earnestly. All my reading was about that. All my listening to podcasts. I was meditating more. I was going to all the classes. I was doing all the things. And, from there, the journey just expanded. Eventually, I met a teacher about a year into that who really started to help me make my spirituality like an integrated practice versus like something I did before work and then something I did all the time after work. It really became like life became a spiritual practice. And I've been on that path ever since.
Love that. It sounds so familiar. I have a kind of a similar story. I did have my panic attacks that brought me into meditation as well. That was literally the only way that I could stop them. It was so crazy. But I'm curious to know, I love from your book the fact that you start off the conversation explaining a little bit the concept of your problems are not your problems. And I do understand this, of course, but I believe it's also a real key shift in mindset for the people that are not there yet. So give us all the details possible so that anyone that haven't done this jump, let's say, and this shift of perspective.
Yeah, I think, this really kind of came up in that first conversation with that teacher that I mentioned where, she was like, what do you want? And I was like, well, I want to sell my company for a lot of money. I want a girlfriend, and she was like, oh, so you think something outside of yourself is going to make you feel better. You think that the problem is that you don't have something in the outside world that you want. And basically what she had me do was she had me start to notice and write down every single time I was triggered, every single time I was disturbed. I started doing that and I was like, holy shit, like I'm like triggered like 10 times a day, over little things, right? Like the coffee line moving slow or someone not getting back to me or some girl not texting me, and I was like, wow, my life's a trigger fest. And it became very clear that was a me thing, right? Like there was somebody that could be in that same coffee line. There was somebody that could be in the same text message interaction and have a completely different reaction, have a completely different experience. And so that's when I realized like, wow, like it's not this outside stuff. It's my reactions, and my reactions are a me thing. And that's a consciousness thing. That's my own consciousness that's creating the way I'm relating to the experience. And so when I had that recognition, it just became very clear that working on my consciousness was a much more direct and intelligent approach to feeling good and living joyously and loving life.
I still remember, I don't remember exactly which book was it, but I still remember the time when I was in my phase of neuroscience and scientific stuff about the brain. And this study comes out and it says, the time that the signal from your eyes to your brain arrives, your body already reacted because your brain already perceived that thing. So the eye is actually just a confirmation mechanism of what the brain wanted to see, what expected to see as a pattern. And so that's like science telling you it's not spiritual woo-woo stuff from the ancient wisdom only saying this. We are actually proving with the scientific data that first is your brain, later is your sensory experience. And so you talk in your book on consciousness patterns and, self-repatterning and so on and so forth. Explain me a little bit, how did you go from understanding about, okay, I now can see that I'm triggered. I now see that, this stuff happens and it makes me behave like this, to actually not living that reaction anymore?
Basically, the way that I was taught is like we have these reactions and these ways of relating to things that are based on our consciousness. And the challenge is that most of that stuff, like the kind of foundation of that reactivity, is in the subconscious. Like you can't see it, right? And so I was basically, with this teacher, I was bringing these triggering situations in, and she was coaching me through an exercise where I kind of brought myself back to the situation, shifted to my body, open to what information wanted to come into my awareness, and also emotions, feelings, concepts, right? And was taught how to accept what was ever there. And as I did this, it was like, whoa, like there was like all of these like beliefs and old memories and emotions, and kind of what became really clear. And I was also, taught this, but like my experience was a direct experience where I started to see through that practice that there were things that happened to me at like, 5 years old, 7 years old, whatever, like imprints that I was still living in, right? There was these patterns of patterned way of perceiving and relating to something that were etched into my consciousness when I was like a little kid that were just running on repeat. And most of them weren't helpful, right? Most of them were all about self-protection and avoiding harm and like all of these things that like weren't even true. It was just this process of like noticing these triggers, going into them daily, and then seeing the source code of my consciousness that had been laid down by all these experiences that I didn't even choose. That was the other thing. It's like, okay, cool. Some kid was mean to me on the playground, called me worthless. Little Scott was like, wow, I'm worthless and I don't want to be worthless. So I'm going to achieve. And that strategy was like laid down in second grade. You know what I mean? And 30 years later, I'm still doing it. Right. And so that was the crazy thing about this whole experience was like, wow, like I thought I was like in control of my life, but really I'm just a puppet to these patterns.
I use a methodology in the work that I do with founders, which is understanding where all of these patterns are stored in the fascia, because you can actually, with some instruments now, we are even capable to visualize like the electromagnetic frequency of this knot of energy that is like the kind of memory stored in your body of your subconscious pattern. And, doing some exercises in the past months, I was working on some concept of, money abundance and all whatever, like lack of constraints regarding material things. And I get into this meditation and this memory comes like if it was yesterday. And I was in second grade or something like that. And I lent a very high quality notebook to a friend. And after some days, he comes back and he gives me like a very low quality paper. And my mother, when I go back home, she's like screaming at me, why, Ale, did you lend this book of super high quality? I'm spending so much money for your studies. And then you give the books away and you get like the very bad ones and you're being cheated and so on and so forth. And I was like, wait a second. Is that the memory that is making me think that if I do certain thing with money, like material lending and be abundant, I thought, well, my mother had many, so why don't I just give one extra to my friend? So it was that little thing that was repeating over and over until the very big adulthood. Yeah, it's really, really crazy.
This is like, to me, like, the big idea for anybody listening that's an entrepreneur is it's like you can focus on like going and trying to make more money and chasing, right? Or you can start to use these situations and reflections from life to understand like what in your own consciousness is like creating your whole relationship. And I would even say creating your reality. And to me, it's just like you're just, the consciousness game is just a much more fundamental way to kind of dance and work with reality.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious to understand, because this is a pattern that I lived myself and I've lived through anyone that is starting this journey. So when you, let's say on a piece of paper, just saying that your problems are not your problems is relatively easy to admit. But then when you are into that, like shifting the habit to actually understand them as opportunities and learning experiences and so on, it's quite different. Do you still remember like certain kind of frictions from your ego, certain kind of internal patterns that you really had hard time to like dissolve until you could actually get into this new mindset every day without noticing?
Yeah. And I would say I'm still dealing with that, dude. You know what I mean? I've probably been doing that exercise of going into my disturbances every day for 6 years. And, and, and what I notice is that, I still have major blind spots that life shows me. You know, like right now, like I've been dealing with chronic health stuff for 5 years. Like 5 years I haven't had my health. And, you know, there's a lot of days where I'm like, this doesn't feel like an opportunity. This feels like a fucking burden, right? This feels like a major cramp on my life. And, you know, there just always comes back. There always comes a moment where usually often with my teacher or myself, where I'm like, things tend to get so, at least as you go deeper on the path, like the only way through it is acceptance. Like the only way through it is just to like accept the reality as it is and to just surrender to it. And I think like the inflection point of like seeing these as opportunities, you kind of have to trust the process until you start to notice that your life gets better. Like, and specifically, you are able to be in a similar situation that you were before, and you notice you show up differently. That thing that bothered me doesn't bother me as much anymore. Wow. I mean, a big example for me is like, I remember when my entrepreneurship days, I always needed to figure out like what was next, right? It was like this idea of like, well, shit, what am I going to do after this company? And like, what am I going to do? And what am I, what's my next job? And what's my next thing? Like, oh my God. And like, I spent a year just working on trust by noticing every time I wasn't trusting. And then one day I woke up and I was like, I actually have no idea what I'm going to do next or where I'm going to make money or any of those things. And actually I'm okay. And like, it's like those moments that inspire you to keep going and inspire you to start to shift the perspective to see these things as opportunities. And they just keep happening, right? Like I don't think the game ever ends. There's never like a completion level of, okay, now I got it.
I love where the conversation is going. And I love the fact that you bring this topic into the real life, into the professional life with your company and the work that you're doing. I constantly have this question also when I'm a guest on other people's podcasts. Once you get there from a spiritual level, then it seems like for everyone else, question would be, okay, but then you don't want to do anything anymore. You're not ambitious anymore. You're not driven anymore. You're clearly don't think so. You're building something that is clearly reconnecting the dots between these two. I want to know more. I want to know more for myself, but also for the people out there that are like questioning also this kind of work. Like,
yeah, I get it. Well, let me first off say, there usually is some type of reset. So like for me, the way I relate to it is like a pendulum. Like I was like totally focused on the external world, right? With like trying to be successful and ambition and all that. And then when I realized the hollowness of that by itself, I swung in the opposite direction, right? So it was like all about spirituality, all about consciousness. Like my business wasn't that interesting anymore. The success, like none of that was as interesting as like exploring the consciousness. And then there comes a point where you're like, at least for me, where I just felt like my life wasn't full. Like doing inner work all day, right? Like there's a period of time where that probably feels really interesting and fun. But then eventually you're like, hey, like there's got to be more to this. And I started to basically get motivated to create again, right? Motivated to kind of swing back to center and really wanted to like keep the devotion and keep the earnestness of my pursuit of my inner world, but also, create things and build things because I liked that too. And I think, what usually prevents people from holding both is a lot of actually consciousness patterns. So one of those patterns that was like a big thing for me is this concept of polarized thinking, where it's, you think black or white, good or bad. like there's really no room for nuance, and there's really no room for both ends. And we tend to see the world that way when we're just not focused on our consciousness.
That's also where society is pushing us to, right? I mean, everything you do out there, social media, politics, whatever it is, they're all just trying to divide us.
Big time. And so like, I had to become really good at like watching when I was thinking like that, and starting to see that as a pattern itself. And eventually like realize like, cause I wasn't, some people approach spirituality as like, I'm just going to go all in and meditate all day and go move into an ashram or whatever. But like my path was like noticing my reactions to everyday life. Like I was doing other things. Like I've done a ton of different types of practices and modalities and whatever. But like the core practice was noticing how I'm relating to everything, every moment of every day. And, guess what? Like entrepreneurship and building things and the complexity of that provided an incredible arena that triggered me and brought my shit up and brought up all my limiting beliefs and all of these things, right? And so it just became really obvious that like I could still earnestly pursue external goals and use that pursuit as a way to evolve, to see all of the things in my consciousness that weren't serving me. That's really kind of like, that's the concept of conscious accomplishment in my book. It's like, you can use whatever you're moving towards as the way to see yourself more clearly and transform. And, so now I think like the notion that like you can't do spirituality seriously and build something great or have a career or do entrepreneurship is just a concept. That's just an idea. That's a limiting belief, and it's not true. And I'm living proof of that.
This is why I often say, if you're not religious, entrepreneurship is actually the fastest way to spirituality, because you have to go through so many challenges that they push you on any corner. And yeah, probably if it wasn't for that, I would say a lot of people, even if they're not necessarily aware of the spiritual work that they're doing, they do somehow develop certain skills that you're mentioning. So just to start to wrap it up, I want to focus a little bit on, where do you see the world of professional, like business in general, going? I know that as one of your missions is, connecting these dots, making sure that people work on things that actually are aligned with their true purpose. How do you see this integration within the business world? How do you see companies approaching this? How do you see, like, where does it even have to start? Like, who are the stakeholders that can do the change?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it always has to start with the leadership, right? Like, leaders define and shape the culture of a company. And as does everyone there, but like the leader definitely has to kind of be intentional about the culture. And so I think like it starts with leaders. And for me, like, where do I see this going and how do I see it in business? Like, I think the whole purpose of us being here on earth in these bodies is the evolution of our consciousness. Like, that is it. And so like all things are moving towards that, whether we know it or not. They're in support of that. So for me, I believe a natural progression of business eventually is to start to acknowledge that and start to embrace that. And I think spirituality is the last frontier where there's an involvement in business. It's like we have mental health's a part of business now. Like, big companies take care of mental health, physical health. They buy you a gym membership, right? Like, they've done all of these things. Financial health, like obviously, family care, like there's so much integration, but their spirituality is one where people just haven't touched it. And for me, it's like, you don't even call it spirituality, call it consciousness, right? Like this kind of inner development, inner transformation. And I think there's this concept called a deliberately developmental organization, a DDO. And a DDO, basically the idea is that the business is there first and foremost for the personal evolution of everyone involved, not just the profits. And in fact, personal evolution and profits are the same thing. They're the same thing. The evolution is what creates the profit. And so when you do that, like when you take that approach, like there's a lot of different ways that are different that you would build that company who's doing a deliberately developmental organization. There's a book called An Everyone Culture that talks about this. And that's what we're doing at Conscious Talent in my company internally. And where I think this is going. Like, I think like I see more and more leaders that are getting into conscious leadership, that are doing coaching, that are doing all this stuff. And that's the tip of the spear. And then it's like, all right, cool. How do I bring this to my company? I saw how it changed me. I see how I'm a better leader, how I show up in a bigger way. Well, I want that for my people too. And so I think like that's kind of where it's going. And there isn't necessarily a playbook for like how to build these companies like this. But I think there's a lot of people trying to figure that out and a lot of people who are excited to experiment with it.
But do you see any specific bottlenecks or probably like, kind of like false myth about this? Because we've been hearing company culture for probably as long as I'm in business. So what's the difference between having a strong company culture and being focused on actual conscious ascension and development and inner work?
I know a lot of people that it's like, oh, we have a strong company culture and that means we work hard and we go to happy hour and, we love each other. It's not necessarily the explicit intention of like, you're here to to understand yourself and to evolve your consciousness. That is a very specific type of company culture that has largely not been around. Like there's like some companies like Bridgewater is an example, the world's largest hedge fund. They have a deliberately developmental culture. It's a very unique culture there. Most people do not operate like that. But I think many companies, in my opinion, as leaders go on these journeys, are going to increasingly want to make their cultures about consciousness. I don't really know a lot that do today. I know a lot of founders who are doing it in isolation, but they're not actually saying, hey guys, like we're all going to do inner work and I'm going to know what your weakness is and your growth edge is, and you're going to know mine, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to go into each other's shit, and we're going to like, that sounds really hard and scary to most people.
Yeah, especially because, the first thing that comes to my mind is when I started to do this work on my own, I was almost ridiculed by my team members, and I was the founder. And they were like, oh, you're doing 24 hours fasting and you're here and you're like lightheaded in the office, or you're doing meditation every morning and then, I don't know, whatever. So do you see, like, if you were a founder now that is approaching this inner development for himself, herself, what would be the single most important advice that you would give these people?
Your way of being speaks louder than words. Like, I think that there's a tendency that I've seen for like some founder to like go on a spiritual journey or go on some plant medicine experience and come back and say, everybody, you got to do this. And like, look how awesome this is. And right. And like, and just kind of dump it on people when they're not even ready, right? When they're not even ready for that. And maybe even the founder isn't really living it out. They're just kind of coasting off of a peak experience. And I think like for me, like what I've seen most successful in all types of leadership is leading by example. And when it comes to consciousness, your example is the way you show up. It's the way you can, it's your state of being. It's your presence. It's your compassion. It's your, looking inward first, like all of these things. And so I think it has to start there. And at some point, like you need to bring people into this, right? You need to kind of like open the kimono and say, hey, like this is what I'm doing. Who wants in? And I think it's a lot easier to do, to like start like early stage doing that. Like I don't have as much experience or understanding of like, if you've been at your company for 15 years and that the culture has already been set, like how you would change it to become this consciousness focused thing. But I definitely think when you're starting something new, you can have that intention or even early stages and then gradually start to baby step towards that.
Yeah, definitely. One very last question, because it came right at me in the very first, in the last answer that you gave me. When do you know that you're ready? And when do you know that others are ready? Because I think this is the biggest challenge, isn't it?
So when do you think you're ready? Man, I don't know. Like I think like with these things, like I tend to like look for signs in my inner space or my outer space, right? So like I don't know that there's like I have completed XYZ or like I feel X. Like it's kind of like something will come up in your experience that will be a pointing, it will be a sign, it will be an indication that now's the time. And that could be as simple as like being in a meeting and just being like, feeling like, yeah, I need to share this, or it could be something like someone giving you a book that's like related to that. So, you just have to pay attention and just to trust.
Love that. Love that. Well, wonderful, Scott. It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for, first of all, being transparent and sharing these experiences. I know a lot of founders that are way in the middle of their journey and they still don't dare to say this out loud. So it's important that people like us share it more and more. We shine light so that other people feel encouraged to be living in their own light. So thanks so much for that.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on, Alessandro. I appreciate the message of your show and the message that you're spreading.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.